Good afternoon, colleagues. We'll be starting the webinar in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive. So if we give it just a couple more minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. We're going to start the webinar now. So, good afternoon. My name's Paul White, and I'm the Head of Provider Development at NCFE. Hello and welcome to our NCFE CASH webinar today to discuss our approach to adaptations for our early years educator and early years practitioner qualifications. I'm joined today on the webinar by Shuma Hussain, our Qualifications Development Manager, Chris Tubrit, our Product and Content Development Team Manager, and Janet King, our Sector Manager for Education and Childcare. So the agenda for the session today is to take a look at some of the available adaptations, to walk through the risk-rated approach to meeting the Department for Education's early years educator and early years practitioner criteria. We'll take a brief overview of the qualifications that are covered, introduce and use the adaptations for the longitudinal studies. We're also going to look at the professional practice portfolios and risk-rated approaches and guidance for mapping to the DFE EYE criteria. Going to discuss some of the options for learners progressing to FE and HE. And finally, we're going to take some questions that were submitted prior to the webinar, and also, if we can fit them in, some coming through the web chat today. We have tried to incorporate as many of the pre-submitted questions in the material that we're presenting today. So if you feel that your question hasn't been directly answered, it's because we've tried to factor that into the presentation. So I'm going to pass over to Janet King now, who's going to take us through the presentation. So thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Molly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. On this slide, you will find an overview of the adaptations available currently, and these are located on QualHub. Each qualification has a dedicated adaptation section, and those include a risk-rated approach to the Department for Education's early years educator and early years practitioner criteria, mapping guidance for that criteria and how it could work and support you and your students moving forward. Also on QualHub, you will find information about health and social care, early years, as we're talking about today, and other childcare qualifications such as supporting teaching and learning, and any joint adaptation guidance that's been reached through joint awarding organisation consultation. Any specific communications relevant to individual qualifications, and of course, adaptation documentation for longitudinal studies where this is applicable. Thank you, Molly. So let's begin by giving a little bit of background context here. So as the pandemic continued to impact access to early years and childcare placements, we started to work on a risk-based approach with other awarding organisations also offering early years educator and early years practitioner qualifications, and sought DFE approval, which of course we now have. The risk-rated approach clearly identifies early years educator and early years practitioner criteria that must be seen, highlighted as amber, embedded as knowledge, highlighted as grey, or subject to further flexibilities, highlighted as green. So let's just look now at what's on this slide. We work collaboratively to enable approval from the Department for Education. The Department for Education early years educator and early years practitioner criteria have been risk rated to maximise and optimise learners' opportunities within the real work environment. And what that means is that the early years educator criteria and the EYP criteria were looked at independently of any qualifications that were built around that criteria to actually ascertain, okay, so from these 6 criteria and their associated sub-criteria, what does a student at level 3 or level 2 need to be seen to have achieved, need to have been seen in order to confirm competence? Those criteria were then risk-rated amber. What needs to be embedded in knowledge, because that criteria is really asking the student to be able to actually apply knowledge. So what can be embedded in knowledge, generated through knowledge awareness? So that was highlighted grey. What's left within that 6 criteria now was highlighted green. And that's because there's often a mixed approach in terms of the different assessment methods that can be used. And they're clearly identified on that risk-rated approach. So that's the way that it works. So you may have, you've got, and we'll go through each qualification, but the qualifications themselves have been risk-rated in terms of EYE criteria or EYP criteria. And that's the generated evidence that must be in place. The key provided within the document will guide the assessor when learners that are in placement and the risk-rated approach should be referred to. This will help inform planning and assessment. We know that placement has been limited, and therefore knowing what the amber criteria are guides the assessor, supports efficient preparation, and maintains rigour in line with competence and the EYP criteria. The centre must ensure that all amber risk-rated criteria is observed, either directly by the assessor or the expert witness who can provide a testimony. And planning can ensure that these criteria are observed during any placement opportunity. We understand and appreciate and acknowledge that it might not be the centre assessor who is going in to make those judgment calls on the amber competencies. We understand that, and the expert witness testimony here is really important and significant. So a very experienced level 3, presumably having a position such as room leader, deputy manager, manager and so on, but an experienced practitioner. These are the people who can provide a testimony for the amber criteria, where an assessor is unable to enter the workplace for the reasons that we know. In that case, when a witness testimony is being used, then the triangulation of evidence to strengthen that competence is really important. Professional discussion, reflective account, additional evidence to support that criteria. At the end of the day, it will be the centre assessor who is signing that student off. Learners can prepare for all other criteria, the grey and the green, with the approach suggested on the risk-rated mapping document. So it really does take into account what is the absolute minimum that a student must be seen to be competent in. Those are the amber criteria. There is no option for alternating anything that's listed as amber. Anything that's rated as amber must be seen by somebody who knows what they're looking for, whether that's a centre assessor with all of the wealth of experience and knowledge, or whether that's an expert witness that the centre assessor is confident is in a position to be able to make that call, and then of course it's wrapped around and triangulated with further evidence. Let's take a look, Molly, at what that risk-rated approach might look like, or does look like in fact. Okay, now this is quite small on your screens, I appreciate that, but what basically this risk-rated approach is A, common to all awarding organisations that are offering EYE qualifications. We're looking at the EYE one first as an example. And it takes you through, if we just scroll down, it takes you through that risk-rated approach. And of course, you can read this at your leisure by looking on QualHub and selecting the qualification, the early years educator qualification that you're offering. You can see there where Molly is the key at the top. So you've got the grey, anything highlighted in grey, evidence generated can be knowledge related. That could be evidence that's been generated through an assignment, through a task, or if you wanted to, you could generate further knowledge evidence to meet this risk-rated approach. It is at your discretion. But grey, knowledge. Green, use of another suitable alternative method, such as a professional discussion. And amber, these are the critical aspects that must be observed. And it says in the key, these criteria must be observed. An expert witness testimony can be used where it is not safe to gain direct observation of performance by the assessor. When expert witness testimony has been used, robust triangulation of performance-based evidence, such as professional discussion, should be applied to strengthen the competence. So because that decision is being signed off by you as the centre assessor, but not reached directly by you, you need to have that extra sort of layer of confidence. So additional criteria, additional methods can be used to generate further evidence. So you can see there as we scroll down, Molly, that there are some grey highlighted criteria there. So 1.1, for example, which is all around the expected patterns of development. That can be evidenced through sort of previous work, through assignments, through tasks. So it's knowledge-based. And if we look at maybe an amber and a green, Molly, by scrolling down, please. Thank you, keep going. There's a lot of knowledge there in the first learning outcome. And then we can see, thank you, Molly, there's a lot of the ambers there. So where we're looking at planning, where we're looking at providing learning experiences and children's participation and so on, and for students' participation in child-led and adult-led activities, those are listed as amber. What I will say at this point is there is the relaxation of hours. We're not looking at the hours, we're looking at competence, and the competence is being based around this risk-rated approach. And also where students are not able to gain their competence across the age ranges, there's also an appreciation of that with the ways of working at the moment, in particular, restricting access to to different age ranges and the way that you know, early year settings are working and operating, and that is also relaxed. So where it's asking for evidence from different age ranges, please be assured that this can be done through the discussion around what the student has actually been involved in. How would you adapt? What would happen if? And those sorts of things can be used to prompt student competence and achievement here. Have we got an example of a green at all? Aha, well done, Molly, there's one. Okay, so we're talking there, 4.3 is an example. Engage in continuing professional development and reflective practice to improve own skills, practice and subject knowledge. And this, of course, could be a professional development plan. And if you're using an ILP, an individual learning plan, or any kind of tracking document in tutorials and things like that, where goals and targets might be discussed, then things like that can be used, and reflective accounts around that, including professional discussions. So we're sort of in the territory of work products and wraparound of different qualifications. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, Molly, please. That gives you an idea of how that risk-rated approach will be used. There are no gaps, or there must be no gaps in the evidence generation for what's on that risk-based approach. There may well be gaps in the units and so on, and we'll talk about those now, but there must be no gaps in that risk-rated approach. Okay, we can look at this then. Worked on collaboratively, EYE and EY, let's just summarize, EYE and EYP criteria, risk-rated, follow the key, make sure Amber is observed by somebody who knows what they're looking for, strengthen witness testimonies, and learners can then prepare for all of the criteria in line with the approach suggested on the risk-rated map. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So here we're going to start looking at individual qualifications. So let's start. Are you okay, Molly? We're on slide 6. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Molly. So on slide 6 here, we're going to start looking now at how that adaptation, how that risk-rated approach can be applied to different qualifications. So let's begin by looking at the diploma in early years education and care and the technical level 3 diploma in early years education and care. So what we can see on this slide now is the knowledge, the skills, the external assessment and the longitudinal study within our table. What we are advising and encouraging is that all knowledge assessment criteria is achieved, because this is providing the underpinning knowledge for the skills outcomes. Wherever possible, knowledge assessment criteria should be worked on by your students. The risk-rated approach must be used to ensure all early years educator criteria are met. And then full unit claim will be possible, even if you have gaps within your unit. So for example, in the qualifications where you have knowledge and skills making up the full unit achievement, we're encouraging all knowledge to be achieved. You will then have your risk-rated approach to refer to. So your risk-rated approach, the ambers, the greys, the greens, will have no gaps, but you may have found that you've mapped to only some of the criteria that are skills within the qualification. There may be gaps in your unit. That is okay as long as there are no gaps and you've followed the key to the appropriate methods for the risk-rated approach. This webinar is not going to go into detail around teacher assessed grades, but external assessment, as you know, will be subject to the teacher assessed grade for these qualifications. And as we go through the presentation, we'll take a look at the adaptation to the longitudinal study, which is part of this qualification, or part of these qualifications, namely Unit 3.15. Thank you, Molly. Okay, so this qualification, the Level 3 Diploma for the Early Years Workforce, is also subject to the same sort of pattern that we've just seen in the other qualifications. The exception, the difference being that this has no external assessment. However, we would keep that clear message, working towards the knowledge assessment criteria with your students is important. It provides underpinning knowledge. If we're going to take that risk-rated approach right down to the bare minimum for rigour and for confidence for your students and for the workplace, then it's really, really important, you know, that the knowledge is maintained to build that confidence. And the longitudinal study is also part of this qualification. Thank you, Molly. So let's take a look at this adaptation. This adaptation that we're going to look at in a moment should only be used where placement has been interrupted and the collation of observations as part of the longitudinal study have not been possible. For example, to give you some context here, placement could have been interrupted because of student access, or indeed child attendance made adaptation here a necessity. Your students could have selected a young child that then maybe not part of that bubble, or not attending for weeks on end due to the nature of the pandemic and associated restrictions. So it's really important that we acknowledge that. Each learner must have knowledge, understanding and skills of the observation cycle when working with babies and young children, in line with the current statutory early years framework, and provide evidence of this as part of previous assessment for Unit 3.14, for example, in those three qualifications that we've just looked at, for example. Really important, and I can't emphasize this enough, students do need to feel confident in the purpose of observation, in how to observe, in observation for intervention, for interest, for planning, for supporting, and all of the things that are involved within the early years foundation stage, the statutory guidance requirements. So what did we do? Knowing that it was going to be difficult, we created 4 observations. These have been externally set, and learners can use these observations to complete their evaluation. So yes, they will still have to do a longitudinal study. If they are unable to actually, you know, embrace and engage with the longitudinal study in the normal way, then they can refer to the adaptation. They can use the 4 set observations, for example, and the adapted mark scheme can be used by centres to ensure that the student completes their evaluation. And again, the skills of observation should have already been assessed as part of these qualifications, and it's the evaluation that's relevant and mostly identified through Unit 3.15. So learners are still required to complete individual evaluations in line with the requirements of assessment. There are adapted observations, because there are 4 preset observations that have already been done for the students and an adapted mark scheme. It might be useful now, Molly, to look at that adaptation material. And again, let me just reassure you that all of this information is available on QualHub. Thank you, that's the one, Molly. There's so many documents to upload. Thank you, that's great. So here we can see an adaptation to completing the longitudinal study. And the 3 qualifications that we've looked at already are clearly there. They're relevant to those qualifications, the workforce, EYE, the diploma in early years education and care, and the technical version of that qualification, the technical level 3 diploma in early years education and care. Okay, let's just scroll down if it will allow you, Molly. Let's have a look. Oh, it's playing. Good, good. Okay, so it gives you an introduction there to the what and why, which we've just talked about. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty if it will allow. So here you have got some background information. We're looking at child S, and then we go through, and as we scroll further down, Molly, we'll be able to see that there are 4 little observations, 1, 2, 3, 4, using different methods, looking at child S over a period of time, using and actually giving the information that the student would have gathered themselves had they been able to do so. So we're ending there on the checklist is what you can see there, and then I think ends on some sort of timed one. So 4 observations are there, and students can have those. Lovely, we've got the little snapshot. So a variety of observations that meet the criteria for the observations. It then goes on with an adapted mark scheme, Molly, if you scroll down on this same document. Thank you ever so much. So this mark scheme here will be familiar. If you're working on any of those 3 qualifications that we've mentioned so far, this mark scheme will be familiar to you, and it's been slightly adapted to ensure that the students are able to conclude using the information they have, and with an appreciation that this information has been preset, that they have not been able to gather that evidence from their own work placement. So some of the criteria have been suitably amended to take that into consideration. Okay, I'm happy for us to go back to the PowerPoint slide, Molly, and to go on to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you, that's great. So we've looked at the qualifications, and what we've tried to do here now is actually look at individual qualifications and how they might be met. So the level 3 diploma in childcare and education, often referred to as the legacy diploma in childcare and education. So how is that working? Again, these patterns, the familiar and similar patterns here, all knowledge units. These are graded in this particular qualification. And not only will that help with the underpinning knowledge that the students need to be able to prepare for work in this field, but also will support with that all-important teacher assessment for the grades for the external assessments too. So the risk-based approach has been mapped to the professional practice portfolios 1 and 2. And this is what needs to be used to be able to support with meeting the early years educator risk-based approach. Now, what we have done, and you've got the option here, you can simply take that risk-rated approach that we've already looked at earlier, and you can say, okay, I need to generate evidence, amber, grey, green. what we've done is we've tried to be a little bit more helpful, and we've looked at the qualifications. Because this isn't a knowledge and skills mix, it's got knowledge unit and then it's got the skills wrapped around, or the EYE criteria wrapped around in the professional practice portfolios. We took the practice portfolio unit and we tried to give a little bit of a mapping guide into where perhaps you could go to find that generation of evidence. It's a guide, and you might find that individual students are generating that evidence in other knowledge units, or you know, and as long as you're the grey, the amber and the green is being met, not a problem at all, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of a guide, really. There are no longitudinal study here. So Molly, you're going to have to do some magic again. Let's see if we can actually have a look at the professional practice portfolio, just to see if we can see how the amber, the green and the grey has been mapped in as a guide. So this is the professional practice portfolios that we're looking for now. Brilliant, that's the one. Okay, excellent. So as we scroll down, you'll see it's the same key, it's the same mapping, it's the same criteria. And then what we've done is we've taken the professional practice portfolios and highlighted where the ambers could be met. And we've gone through this and done the same with all of the criteria in the risk-rated approach. So as long, you know, this is a guide, but you could use this, because if we were looking at, you know, what's the student already achieved, this might be a good starting point. The important thing to note is that you're going to have gaps on here. There's gaps already that are being shown. There must be no gaps on the risk-rated approach. So this is almost a, where might I find this information for my students using the professional practice portfolios, and this gives you a little bit of a clue. Keep going, Molly. Let's see if we can see any other colours. More ambers. Oh, some greys, some greens. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Molly. So that gives us an idea of, okay, I'm doing the diploma in childcare and education. I'm going to continue working with my students through those knowledge units to the best I can in the time that I have. I'm going to look at the professional practice portfolio guide, which is what we're looking at now. I'm going to look at the risk-rated approach. I'm going to make sure that I've got evidence generated for each of the criteria on the risk-rated approach. To help me to do that, I can actually use this as a mapping guide to get me going, and then as long as I've got no gaps in the evidence generated for that risk-rated approach, I'm going to be okay, and my students are going to be okay. There are likely to be gaps in the professional practice portfolio. That is okay. Thank you, Molly. We can go back to the slides now. Excellent. So this is the technical version of that qualification. The technical version of the diploma in childcare and education, and it follows the same pattern as the previous qualification, except the discrete unit that has been allocated to the EYE criteria and the competencies this time. It's not a professional practice portfolio 1 and 2, it's been allocated as Unit 16. And so Unit 16 is what we've used as a mapping document. So let's just get our heads around. All knowledge units are graded. We're encouraging that to continue because it supports the sufficiency for external assessment and the tag processes in terms of reaching a justified decision. but also it provides that underpinning knowledge and preparation for work in this sector. So important with a licensed practice qualification. The risk-based approach has been mapped to Unit 16, to the professional practice portfolio, which we know and refer to as Unit 16. And that must be used to ensure all UIE criteria are met. You can claim, just as we said before, there are going to be gaps in some of these skills-based units. You'll be able to claim for all of Unit 16 as long as there are no gaps in the evidence generated through the risk-rated approach. External assessment, we know, will be awarded through a tag, and the longitudinal study is not applicable to this qualification or its legacy version. Let's just take a look at the adaptation template for Unit 16. You have to do your magic again, Molly, sorry, and thank you. Brilliant. So you'll begin now to see the familiarity. This is the risk-based approach, and it's been mapped now to Unit 16. So as we go down a little bit, Molly, through this document, let's make sure we can see where some of the greys, the greens, and the ambers have been identified. If students have achieved other things that we've got a gap for, great, absolutely great. But what you need to make sure is that you've got these ambers covered, and we've given a guide as to where you might find them, that you've got the greys covered, and that you've got the greens. Let's just keep going till we're reassured that those are the colours that are in there. And again, all of this documentation can be found on the qualification page in the adaptation section of the Qual Hub. Lots of ambers so far. We have a green, okay. Okay, lovely, thank you. And the reason for the greys is that what you will find on the risk-based approach, where it's been highlighted as grey, you'll be able to refer back to those units that have been knowledge units within the qualification content, and you will be able to cross reference to those as well. So the risk-rated approach is your starting point. You've then got a guide as to where you might find them within your Unit 16 or your professional practice portfolio 1 and 2, and then you're beginning to generate that evidence. The critical factor is what's amber on that risk-rated approach must have been seen. What's grey can be embedded into knowledge-based units. What's green can almost be a flexible combination of different assessment methods. There will be gaps on your Unit 16 portfolio, just as we've seen on the other. That's fine, and you'll be able to do full claim as long as there are no gaps on the risk-rated approach. Thank you, Molly. We can move back to slide 11, I believe. Excellent. So let's just take a breath, because there's a lot of information there about the level 3. Hopefully what's clear is that you must follow a risk-rated approach. That will give you the efficiency model that you need, where placement has been limited, where placement has been perhaps only recently reinstated, for example. The ambers must be achieved, and you can work and plan and prepare for that for your students. What is possible then is that the remaining evidence in line with that risk-rated approach can be met through different methods. Now, the same approach is being applied in principle to the Level 2 diploma for the early years practitioner. We're very much aware that this qualification, if not taken as part of an apprenticeship, it is typically done over 1 year and therefore has had real sort of complications and hurdles for students to be able to go to placement under such restricted times during this pandemic. So again, the same principle, following a risk-rated approach with the same key in terms of grey, amber, green, with obviously the same meaning, slightly different criteria, but the same principle applies. Now, we do acknowledge and appreciate that that time has been limited. However, it does allow for that focused planning if you're able to get students into block placement, if you're able to work towards those AMBERs efficiently, and you've been preparing for all of that criteria, you know, then your students will still potentially, hopefully, have that opportunity to gain their full qualification. Again, we would encourage all knowledge assessment criteria to be achieved, as this provides underpinning knowledge for the skills outcomes. We're going to take a quick look at the risk-rated approach now, but there is no external assessment and the longitudinal study does not apply to this qualification. So Molly, you've got your magic wand again, please. I'm glad you're doing that and not me. Brilliant, thank you, Molly. So again, it's the same in principle. Obviously, the early years practitioner outline criteria slightly different than the Level 3 early years educator criteria, as we would expect and as we know. So moving down through this, Molly, that same principle, let's just make sure we can see how that grid is being applied. So again, we've got the grey for the knowledge, we've got amber for some of the skills there, and let's make sure we can see a range of different, keep jumping for you, a range of different ones. So there we can see the greens as well. So there are no gaps in this risk-rated approach, okay? It's important to note is that with the early years practitioner qualification, just in the same way as some of those other qualifications we've looked at the Level 3 are built, most units are a combination of knowledge and skills. We would encourage the student to gain all the knowledge. We would encourage the students to gain their work experience where they can and work through this risk-rated approach to generate evidence. We would also, you know, appreciate that there may be units within the specification where knowledge is being achieved and skills only partial. However, there will be no gaps in the generated evidence to the risk-based approach. I hope that's clear. Thank you, Molly. We can go to slide 12. Thank you. Okay, so if we just stop there for a moment, Molly, thank you. So despite every best effort, access to placement may continue to interrupt student success. You may, as centre assessors, not feel confident that the AMBERs have been satisfactorily met. We are confident and hopeful that that risk-rated approach goes a long way, however, in securing success for your students. With the relaxed approach around the number of hours and the age ranges, this approach is the most flexible it can possibly be. And we encourage centres to use this approach wherever possible to ensure achievement of a licence to practice qualification, where they're expecting to go into the workforce. That is really what is the intention. However, we also need to be pragmatic here. This will only work if placement has been available to allow for the AMBER criteria to be achieved? What if no placement has been available or insufficient placement has been available at level 2 or level 3? And these are questions we have to ask ourselves and take very, very seriously. What I would like to say and emphasize is that there will always be the option to delay. There will always be the option at level 2 and level 3 to wait until competencies have been securely achieved if you're not happy with the risk-rated approach. Although, as I say, we are confident that allows a really good option. The second option that we'd like to talk to you about today is the knowledge-only pathway. So it's important that learners who have been working very hard, centre staff who've been working tirelessly to encourage student success, it is so important that progression, whether that's from level 2 to level 3 within the FE environment or from level 3 to higher education, it needs to be validated. There needs to be a recognition of those efforts. So we've worked together with Ofqual, DFE, Education and Skills Funding Agency, the ESFA, and UCAS to agree how learners can progress through a knowledge-only version of the early years educator, whichever one they have taken, or the early years practitioner qualification. Thank you, Molly. The certificate of achievement will display the same qualification reference number and title of the original qualification undertaken, with knowledge-only pathway clearly identified. This is to distinguish between knowledge-only achievement and an early years educator, early years practitioner competent to practice at level 2 or level 3. Really important, you know, for the employer and so on. So this is not the gain of a license to practice qualification, but what it does do is allow for a qualification that acknowledges the knowledge that has been achieved. Learners who do wish to embark on the Department for Education skills criteria at a later date will still have an opportunity to do so, and we're finalising approaches to how that might happen. Thank you, Molly. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of students who want to use this qualification to get to university? UCAS have confirmed that learners will continue to gain the respective allocated UCAS tariff points, so there should be no interruption to university by doing a knowledge-only qualification. ESFA have confirmed that funding will be in place, so there'll be no obstacle with funding for a knowledge-only qualification. And the DFE have also confirmed that their lists of full and relevant qualifications for the early years educator and practitioner have been updated regarding the differentiation between knowledge-only pathways and competence to practice, which adds clarity for employers. And this was very significant in terms of if we're sharing a title, we're sharing a QRN, it needs to be clearly identifiable to the employer that knowledge only is not a license to practice. And the DFE full and relevant qualification list has been updated to make that clear. Thank you. And more information on how that will work, the practicalities around that, and how to transfer and so on will be communicated shortly. So, and we're saying by the 1st of May there. What I would like to say, and just reiterate really, is that the intention of these qualifications are to offer students a license to practice, a route into a workforce that needs them. Where possible, the level 3 and the level 2 adaptations through the risk-based approach are your go-to. They're your go-to place. Let's see how we can use this risk-rated approach to enable full completion of the qualification with its full intended aim. Whilst we can acknowledge that this is not always possible. And where it's not possible, we have the option to delay if placement's only just started and you want to go on a little bit longer, for example, or the option to fall onto a knowledge-only pathway. So this is a really good place in terms of options, in terms of securing achievement, in terms of supporting retention, success and achievement data and so on, which we know is critical. Now, what we will do is actually continue to work with you, continue to liaise with the people that have helped us to reach these decisions and make sure that you have all the information that you need. Thank you, Molly. I believe I'm going to hand back for some questions now. There's a lot of information there. Thank you for your patience. Moving forward, we'll take as many questions as we can. Thank you.
Okay, Janet, thank you very much for that in-depth and really comprehensive overview of those suite of qualifications. I'm hoping that delegates find those really helpful. So we have got over kind of 500 people on the webinar today. The questions, both before and after, have come in thick and fast. So some of them might already cover points that we might have spoken about. Some might be new, but I think if we have already covered it, if we can just restate it so that it's as clear as possible, that'd be great. So I'll direct them, Janet, in the first instance to you, but if Chris or Schumer and other colleagues on the call are able to help, that would be great. So we've got a question here about, can we just clarify, if possible, the evidence methods that can be used when observations are not permitted?
Yeah, I'll take this one, no problem. So what's important, again, going back to that risk-rated approach, whether you're thinking level 3, whether you're thinking level 2, if something has been identified on there as amber, then it must be seen. But it must be seen by somebody who knows what they're looking for. And by that, I mean a centre assessor, if they can gain access. And if not, and the question implies that, you know, presumably not, then an expert witness testimony can be used. And that expert witness providing that testimony should be somebody who's very experienced, who is used to making decisions of this kind, or knows exactly what they're looking for, because they understand what the competence is trying to achieve. And that might be somebody who's a room leader or designated sort of as a curriculum lead, or a deputy manager or manager, sorry, then that is absolutely fine. When an expert witness testimony has been used, it's very important that evidence is triangulated, and that simply means if you've not seen it yourself as the centre assessor, but you still are going to be the person signing that competence off, that you must make sure you strengthen that for your own reassurance and confidence through such things as a professional discussion. Thank you. Okay,
thanks for that, Janet. I think this might be another one for you as well. Will the placement hours to award the EYP licence to practice be reduced as a result of the lockdown?
Yes, the placement hours for level 3 EYE and level 2 EYP have been relaxed. So what you will find is that, yes, record hours in the usual way by all means, but the emphasis within this adaptation period is not around the number of hours, but around the competence and around meeting the risk-based approach through a generation of evidence in line with the key provided, the grey, the amber, the green. So yes, a relaxation of hours, and also just to reinforce that we know students can't move around their placement opportunities like they used to as well. So we're very aware that age ranges might be limited to one in particular. That's fine. Where an amber is looking for wider age range competence, that can be achieved through that sort of discussion around what's been achieved. So if you're working with children, or your students working with children aged 2, for example, then you're going to ask about adaptation for either side of that age range, for example. So ours, completely relaxed, use the risk-rated approach, and be mindful that, yes, great if students can move around the age ranges, but an appreciation that that is not always as straightforward as it could be.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for that, Janet. So if EYP level 2 learners are unable to get a placement and they select the knowledge only option, is there a time limit for them to revert back to the normal EYP level 2?
Hi, Paul. It's Chris.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, great, thank you.
Yes, certainly. So if learners do revert to the fallback option, the knowledge only option, and wish to progress with the level 2 at a future date, then no, there isn't a time limit on that. Essentially, they can RPL the knowledge only criteria at any time in the future as the knowledge only elements, but naturally they'll have to fill the gaps with the evidence towards the EYP criteria. So no, to answer that question, there isn't a time limit if somebody falls back to a knowledge only, being able to top that up essentially with the full level 2 EYP.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. That was really helpful intervention. So thanks for that. Next one here about how is evidence to be collated if students are bubbled in a particular age group in settings due to COVID?
Yeah, so again, just to reassure that we know it's not going to be possible to be able to work across those age ranges. So there will be a relaxation there. And what's important is that you use the information that the students are generating within the age range they're working with to be able to make sure that a discussion is held around adaptations that the students make in terms of differentiation across those age ranges. So please don't worry where a student is not able to cover the 0 to 5. It's difficult at the best of times, and of course it's heightened at this moment, so there will be an appreciation of that.
Okay, thanks for that, Janet. There have been an awful lot of questions around the longitudinal study, so far too many to try and answer each one, but just generally, Janet, sort of, could you just provide a bit of clarification about the adapted longitudinal study? So for example, a learner's fully qualified if they use this method. Do you know?
Yeah, okay, absolutely. So as long as, again, everything's been met in terms of the risk-based approach, the adaptation for Unit 3.15, the longitudinal study, using the adaptation, therefore using the 4 observations that we've provided, using an adapted mark scheme, that will give full achievement of Unit 3.15 and will contribute to the overall achievement for that student. There is no problem whether you do the full longitudinal study, i.e. you do the 4 observations yourself because you're able to, or whether you use the adaptation to draw conclusions from 4 preset observations. Achievement will be seen as achievement.
Okay, Janet, thank you for that. Another question here about reduction in units. So is there a reduction in units for the level 3 certificate?
Chris, are you okay to take this one?
Yes, certainly. So just to clarify that we aren't actually reducing any rules of combination across any of the EYE, EYP qualifications. The adaptations that we've actually put in place is that the risk-rated approach, the longitudinal study, the adaptations to the work placement, but there's been actually no reduction in the number of units required to complete as required as part of the normal rule of combination. So just wanting to be clear that there hasn't been a reduction. What we have done, though, beyond that, is put in place through further work with the DFE, with the ESFA and UCAS and so on, is a knowledge only fallback, which is essentially a reduced content pathway within the qualification for those that cannot undertake any work placements or are struggling to undertake work placements to demonstrate the license to practice criteria, the EYE and EYP criteria. So for those learners who are looking to progress to higher or further education, then there is that knowledge only option for them to fall back onto to progress. So it's not necessarily a reduction in units, but that pathway will naturally in itself be a reduction in content, which in itself would just be knowledge only. So yeah, I just want to be clear on that there hasn't actually been a reduction in units, but hopefully that answers the question there, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think that's very clear. So thanks for that. I know just in the final slide or the penultimate slide, Janet, you mentioned about UCAS points, but just a question here about will students who have the knowledge only option get the required UCAS points? Do we know?
Yes, UCAS have confirmed that they will apply the UCAS tariffs in exactly the same way, so in exactly the same grading systems and so on as previously available. So, and that is to aid students who are moving on to university but have been impacted by the placement of opportunities, and it will allow them to move on without interruption. So UCAS and the allocated UCAS tariff points in line with the discrete qualifications will be as they originally were.
Okay, that's great, Janet. I'm conscious of time, and we've now slightly overrun 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to take this last question for this session, I think. And this is around, we're not an academic year provider. We enroll all year round. What about finishers in July and August? So I don't know, Janet or Chris, who's best to take this one for me? It's final.
If I can pick this one up, Paul, please.
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Certainly. So I think what the first thing to start off with for EYE and EYP qualifications is to be really clear about which category these qualifications are in terms of off-quals determination of categories. So as part of the VCRF regulatory framework, we've categorized qualifications into category A and category B. And for those category B qualifications, it's those qualifications that might have an occupational element, which is these qualifications, but also serve towards progression to higher education or employment. So for these particular qualifications, because they are typically delivered in a study program fashion, or most like GQ, these are specifically categorized as B1 qualifications, and therefore the results of these qualifications will be held until results day. So I appreciate the response or the question here was around that they're not typically delivered in an academic session, and that they typically do a roll-on, roll-off delivery model, and that's absolutely fine. But if they do look to claim in July and August, then naturally it's going to be very unlikely that we're going to be able to obviously issue those results in line with results day, and that results may just come later on that. What I do want to be clear on as well is that being mindful that adaptations in the awarding of teacher assessed grades are in place as part of that regulatory guidance up until the 31st of August. So beyond that, we don't yet know if adaptations and teacher assessed grades will be permitted beyond that, and that's something that the Department for Education and Ofqual will communicate later in this academic session. So if you are looking to finish your learners in July, August, that's absolutely fine. It's unlikely we'll be able to issue the results in sufficient time alongside results day planned for the 10th and the 12th of August. But you can still look to claim them, and we'll look to award them as quickly as possible. But the cut-off deadline, as it stands, is the 31st of August until we hear further information from Ofqual or DFE, should any of that be extended.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that clarity, Chris. So I'd just like to thank my colleagues Chris and Janet and Schumer and Molly, who have joined me today on the webinar. We hope that you found it useful and informative, and helps you to go back into your centres and continue to deliver the great teaching and learning that I know that you all do. So for further information, if you visit the COVID Response Hub, where we'll be coordinating on a regular basis all the questions that we get in our frequently asked questions, and there's other support materials on there. And alternatively, if you want to contact our customer support team, you can see the email address there. So on that note, we have overrun, but thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to speak to you again in the future. Thank you and good afternoon.